Hello everyone, I'm Taka Awori, founder and CEO of Busara Africa, a Pan-African leadership development firm. Welcome to the Leadership in Africa Redefined podcast. This podcast seeks to do two things. One, change the narrative of leadership in Africa, and two, provide concrete strategies and tips for leading in an African context. We do this by interviewing amazing African leaders so that the narrative of leadership in Africa is defined by the best of us, not the worst of us. We share their stories and provide practical suggestions for dealing with the challenges of leading on this continent. We discuss, interrogate, and examine concrete leadership practices that work. We also look at failures that these leaders faced and how they navigated their ways back on track. It's an exciting and empowering space for leaders to thrive and engage. Subscribe to the show to become the leader you have always wanted to be. And if you like the show, be sure you rate it and review it. It helps others to find it. Thanks so much. So hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Leadership in Africa Redefined, where we shift the narrative on leadership in Africa by having conversations with extraordinary African leaders. And today I am super excited because we have an absolutely inspiring Tanzanian leader by the name of Rakesh Rajani, who is currently serving as the Vice President of Co-Impact. And for those of you who don't know Co-Impact is a philanthropic collaborative focused on improving the lives of millions through a just and inclusive systems change. And Rakesh is someone who is no stranger to the philanthropic space. Before working with Co-Impact, he's worked with Ford Foundation, and he currently serves on the board of Hewlett Foundation. But one of the things that really inspires me about Rakesh, and I can tell you, his CV is huge. I could go on and on, but I want to lift up the things that really touch me about this man and truly inspire me, is that Rakesh has the leadership capability to found and lead a number of sustainable, impactful civil society organizations. Now, some of you who are in Tanzania or East Africa will be familiar with some of these organizations. For instance, he founded Twaweza, an East African organization that promotes citizen agency and open government. Owezo, Africa's largest program to assess basic literacy and numeracy. But also, he's the founding executive director of Haki Elimu, which is Tanzania's leading citizen engagement and education advocacy organization. And the one I didn't know about, which Rakesh I'm dying to hear more about, is he's also the founding member and co-chair of the Open Government Partnerships, which really restores the social compact between people and their governments. And now they're currently operating in over 75 countries, covering close to 2 billion people. So shifting change in terms of governance, connecting governments and their people. So you can see why I'm so excited about having this conversation with Rakesh. Rakesh, you're really welcome. Huh?
Thank you. It's an absolute joy to be with you over here. Yeah. And if anybody has not yet read your book on redefining leadership in Africa, they really should. It just distills in such elegant way with wonderful examples of amazing people, lots of lessons. So I find it super inspiring, and I hope people will take the time to read your book.
Thank you. I'm humbled by that plug. Thank you. So Jess, you can see from that little bio, you have had such an inspiring but quite an extraordinary journey in terms of the things you've been able to accomplish, the impact you've had within civil society on the continent. Give us a flavor of some of the highlights of your journey, how you came to be where you are now.
Thank you, Taka. And I think often when we ask this question, the natural thing to do is to say, well, I went to this and that university and I had this and that, really helpful mentor. And I have been lucky on all those counts. But where I want to start is is my childhood. I was born and grew up in Mwanza, Tanzania, which is on the southern shores of Lake Victoria and right in the middle of Africa. And, I was lucky enough to go to a primary school. It was a small school with just over 100 students. And we had a few teachers and only one staff person. So that meant all the kids, from when you are very young, we had to take care of the school. We did jobs. We swept the floors, we cleaned the toilets, we prepared the learning materials, and we had to do that in small groups, for 4 or 6, little teams, and then we had that job for one term, like 3 months, and then you shifted to another job. And you made sure that everybody, for example, had cleaning toilets that came up sometime in your few years there, because nobody liked doing that or clean. In that, when we did that, what was interesting is we didn't begrudge it, because we saw this as stewardship, as taking care. And you had to learn a lot. You had to learn around, how do you do things well? How do you make sure you don't forget? How do you hold each other accountable? How do you create fun while doing it? So these are things we did at school. And I think I learned a lot there about things that meant that even when I was hyperfluent executive director, I didn't think twice about picking up the broom and sweeping something, or if you spill the coffee, you did it, or like not having people hired in your organization whose job it was to make tea and coffee for you, because we could all do it. So there was kind of values there, egalitarian values as well. While I was going to school, we also had to make ends meet, right? I was lucky enough to be born in a family where we always had enough to eat. We always had a roof over our heads, but everything else was kind of on the margins and uncertain, and we had to hustle to make life meet. Again, it's not a complaint. That's just how life was. And my parents had a little hole in the wall shop in the central market, where, how our markets are, where you get a little space. And we had to buy and sell things. And I was not just a cute little kid hanging out. I had to work there in the afternoons, in the weekends, during the holidays. And you just learn a lot about how you negotiate basically your goal with engaging with people, right? So when you run a shop, you want to make money, you want to make profit. But what I learned from my parents, who both ran the shop, was that, you had to do it in a way that was also respectful of people. So for example, one of the things we had in our shop, and we're the only ones I think who had it, we had a wooden bench so that women who are nursing their children, often would come from the villages, could just sit and nurse it, get a little respite and do that. And I remember once as a kid, there was a woman who was sitting there for a long time, clearly not interested in buying anything. And I was like wanting to move her along. And my father stopped me and said, no, you don't do that, right? And that taught me a lesson as well, that yes, you want to make profit, but that doesn't mean that you just see everything from that lens. And you have to balance these things. And, I had to figure out how we did VAT returns. I had to figure out forms. Government would make rules all the time. You would have inspectors come in and ask for corrupt bribes. How do you make those choices all along the way is something that I had to learn in that store and center on being human and having integrity. So those lessons, in some ways, I think, were schools that were even more important to me than I think some of the formal education that I had further along the line. I could go on, but I'll let you prompt.
Yeah. So powerful. And again, I love the fact that it hasn't necessarily been you didn't just give a linear story, but you focused on your childhood, which to me underscores this constant importance of learning some of the key leadership fundamentals early in childhood. And what I heard you talk about is, learning these egalitarian values at school, learning how to balance what you're trying to achieve, whether it's profit or whatever goal, but also how you work with people respectfully, and then how you're constantly making these choices. That's really, really interesting. I wonder then, as someone, then if I come to your latter years, there's a job pretty much, your latter years to these amazing organizations that you founded, you've led, And still now you have such an influential role within civil society, not just in Tanzania, but I think this entire continent and even globally. But if I focus on civil society on this continent, what have you seen over this period of time that you've been working with civil society? What have you seen are shifts or changes in how civil society has been thinking and practicing leadership?
So I think, the thing we need to remember is that civil society across many of our African countries has, at least the formal professional part of civil society, NGOs, if you will, as it's developed, has not had benefit of being deeply rooted in, say, the history of fighting for independence or workers' rights, even women's rights. I think there is some that might be the strongest kind of roots we have. But a lot of our roots around at least the growth of professional NGOs has been very much driven by what my fellow Tanzanian Issa Shivji calls a role that was conferred on us to essentially stopgap or fill the gaps created by kind of neoliberal changes, right? So when there was structural adjustment and we divested from education and health and so forth, there were people who would suffer, and then NGOs were supposed to go in and fill those gaps. And the larger question of what kind of economy are we trying to create? What kind of society are we trying to create? And fundamentally, how do we get our government to actually be reflective of and respond to people and work for people, is something that was kind of left to the side. So I think that's one affliction we have. It's different, I think, these are broad arguments, of course, they're exceptions, but in Latin America, for example, there's much more of a movement, the resistance to military regimes. In India, the kind of Gandhian experience and so on have given other live sources for organizing in ways that I think the professional NGO world doesn't have. So that's one affliction. I think the other affliction we have is that because the primary source of professional NGO funding is always donors, we have kind of learned and have been trained to go looking for that money and do whatever is necessary, twist ourselves in pretzels, say we will do this, that, and the other in order to get the money. In fact, there are all kinds of training courses that teach you to figure out what the donor wants and then market yourself. And to me, that's horrible, right? It strips you from saying, what is it that you stand for and care about, and how do you make sure you get the resources to support that, right? And instead, it trains you to work the other way around. So today, if you think there's money for HIV/AIDS, I'm going to work on HIV/AIDS. Tomorrow, if it's on gender, I'll work on gender. If it's on climate, I'll work on climate. So I think we struggle with these two afflictions in a serious way. And what that means for leadership, that I think is the twin challenges we have, is one, how do we see leadership as not authoritarian, as power over, right? Because we just mimic that. That's what we've seen around in our families, in our households, in the country government, and everything in between. And then the other is how do we see leadership as standing for integrity, even when that is popular, even when that may have certain costs. So those I think, in terms of both the thinking and the practice, these are challenges. Where I get inspired is where I see both individual leaders and collectives of leaders and organizations which practice the art of kind of honest feedback to themselves, of kind of self-critical feedback, not because you want to bash yourself up, but because that's an act of love. That kind of honesty and sharing and saying, I'm really struggling with this, but I don't know how to do it. Or how do we've been working on this for 10 years. It seems like we're just spinning our wheel. So for me, the ability to not be fundamentalist about what we do, I think is really key. And it has a combination of, yes, there's a certain kind of self-love and self-affirmation here that I think is very important, so that we don't seek recognition from external sources. I think that's important. But But that, if it is not coupled with a kind of open mind, a curiosity, a willingness to say the thing we cherish the most might be wrong, then the self-affirmation can become lopsided. So I think it's the combination of those two things that are key. And when I've seen that happen, when I feel I've been part of that, I think it's been super powerful going forward.
So interesting. There's so many threads I could pick up along this. And I'm going to come later to your own personal leadership, but let me stick with the leadership you're seeing. And I love the way you did almost a boundary around this within particularly professional NGOs. I think you describe these organizations in almost like the historical context within which they emerged. When you look at how civil society is growing today beyond some of these professional organizations to a lot more movements to address some of the real challenges we're seeing around climate change, around the youth bulge, around persistent conflict, around corruption and other kinds of, weaknesses around governance. What is the type of leadership? And I know you've alluded a little bit to it around the self-love, the open-mindedness, the curiosity. Is there other types of leadership that is really required or that is needed in this moment, particularly within those movements, to ensure that their movements are responding to the kinds of crises we're seeing on this continent?
Yeah, that's a great question, Taka. And I think my honest view is that I think we are making some progress. I think there are some amazing examples out there, but too little for the need and too unsupported and not theorized enough and not kind of supported in practice enough. So I want to I say that not to be a downer, but I say that to say that we have a long way to travel, and we need to be careful that we don't, in our need to look for wonderful examples, that we don't over fetishize or over celebrate the achievements, which are true achievements, but keep it in perspective that we have a long way to travel. I think some of the most, so your question is what types of leadership, right? So I think the most important question, which I don't have easy answers to, is how do you do organizing with constituencies? I use the word organizing rather than mobilizing. For me, mobilizing is, look, I have a great idea, all line up behind my idea, let's march.
Yes.
Right? That's not what I mean. And sadly, too much of the time, that's what we do. But it is an act of organizing what in Swahili you call uragbishi, so Paulo Freire, spoke about. There are different forms of it. Essentially, it is going to communities, not thinking that they have all the answers, but respecting people's heart and mind and working together to analyze our communities and then figure out a pathway for liberation and advancement, and a very rooted pathway to do that. And in that kind of constituency organizing is really key. Now, there's two ways of thinking of leaders. There are leaders who emerge who are already there in those communities. And then the question becomes, how do we acknowledge them, recognize them, give them the supports? They don't have all the answers. They have some of the answers. They know some of what is going on, but they also couldn't do better with support. So how does one do that? That's one type of leader. The other is leaders, perhaps like you and me, Taka, who come from those contexts, but have lots of privilege and are now living in other contexts. What does that mean in terms of how we put ourselves to the use of and service of constituencies, right? And here I take a lesson from people like Gustavo Gutierrez from Peru in the liberation theology movement, who talk about that all the great analysis and all the good deeds in the world are not worth one act of solidarity with the poor. And so something around very concrete things like, how do we spend our time? What's our lifestyle choices that we make? There's something deeply instructive about when you wake up and when the power cuts, you also don't have power like others don't, or you also struggle to get water. as opposed to just reading about it, right? So these are things that I think are worth thinking about. If the goal is to organize around constituencies. I think it's very hard to organize around constituencies, using remote control. And I think that is one that I'm not sure we've cracked on our continent, right? In terms of movements. That said, I think a lot of the exciting movements are not part of the development world, capital D, or the NGOization and so on. And that should be instructive to us. We saw this during COVID, right? That many of the communities who responded really effectively were communities that were organized outside the formal development business. What can we learn from them? A lot of them are led by women. And there's a sort of, I think there's women's leadership there that we need to understand better and know how to support. And another really important gap that I think does require people who can straddle different worlds is to know how to get our governments to work better for people. My hypothesis, and some of my progressive friends really disagree with me on here because they just don't like governments, because governments can be so nasty, they can beat you up, they lock you up, they do horrible things. And yet what I believe is there is no society that can sustainably move forward without making its government work better for them. All the major advances we have achieved are really ones where government has done the right thing. So we can't give up on government, and neither, in my opinion, is this all theory of change that the job of civil society is just to hold government accountable by, shaming it or giving red cards. I don't think that takes us far. We don't have the constituency. So figuring out how do you, on one hand, organize constituencies, and on the other hand, engage productively with government. Don't think of government as monolithic. Try to understand them. Try to be empathetic even of civil servants and politicians in government, and figure out how you can get at least parts of government to change are the key things. And that's, in a way, what the Open Government Partnership in part tries to do, and a number of governance efforts that I've been part of and others have tried to do. That's, to me, those two are the keys.
Hi, folks. Hope you're enjoying the show. So have you heard about the Africa Leaders Circle? Our impactful e-learning platform that enables you to grow into the leader you would want to follow? Here is a message to tell you what you need to know.
Are you a CEO, executive director, or HR manager that is looking to build a pipeline of leaders that are ready to step up into management roles? Are you looking for a self-paced learning platform that provides your leaders with quality content and does not take them away from their work for too long? Are you looking for a program that enables your managers to move from knowledge acquisition to demonstrable improved practice? Then look no further. Sign them up for the African Leaders Circle today. The African Leaders Circle is an e-learning platform that gives your managers access to an exclusive community of leaders across the continent and a wide range of strategies and tools to stand out. We do this through online courses, discussion forums, a library of resources, and a personal learning advisor to support each of your managers to maximize their learning on the platform. To learn more, visit our website www.busara-africa.com.
Don't forget to visit our website busara-africa.com to learn more. And now back to the show. Powerful, powerful. And as I'm hearing you with those two keys, I start to think what comes to my mind is almost, because I often say leadership is often who you are, that even so much what you do. So who do you need to be able to organize constituencies? I'm hearing deeply self-aware, to be able to look at my lifestyle and think about how is this connecting me with those who I want to be in solidarity with, those who are most affected by the cause I'm passionate with. But it's also what is my level of humility that I'm willing to listen deeply and ask, how can I be of service? And at times I might be in front, at times I might be behind. but to play that role effectively in terms of organizing.
Exactly.
Then when I hear you so much on this other leg, the engaging governments, because I think we've almost reached the end of our tether with the shout, government, do this with something. I think we're all coming to a deep appreciation of the complexity and the realities. Even some of our best intentioned politicians and civil servants are grappling with. So how do we start to support them to start to grapple with genuine reform and working with citizens? But again, when I ask myself, what's the beingness that's required? Humility comes up again for me, curiosity, a willingness to understand government systems, realities, and blockages without that sense of almost like moral superiority we often come to when we're outside of the system. You people should be able to do this, until we're actually in the system and we see the realities and we're like, wait a minute, maybe it's not so straightforward. So really interesting. So those two lanes, be able to organize constituencies of those most affected and engaging productively with government. So Rakesh, if I may swing it around to you personally and a bit about your leadership journey as it has evolved. How has your leadership practice changed over the years? What are you still doing? What are you not doing anymore?
Yeah, so perhaps I'll highlight three things. One is in the power framework that I think many of your listeners will be familiar with, and I think you refer to it in the book as well. One of the things I'm learning to do now is to shift. I was good with, I think, not understanding the problem with power over. I think I exercise power too effectively. And the thing I was not as good with is power with as a leader, right? And I saw my role as, being clear, sharing ideas, doing the analysis, kind of helping do that. But there's a way in which you can do that is, on one hand, inspiring and helpful, and on the other hand, takes out the oxygen from others, right? And it's not even begrudge. People appreciate what you do, right? That's what can be insidious about it. There's nothing wrong with power too. It's a great thing, and it is needed, I believe, that to be able to inspire others. That is a role that a leader has. But if you do it, if that muscle is exercised a little too much, what it can do is turn your amazing colleagues into people who are going to run with these amazing ideas and implement them, rather than co-thinkers and people who can also challenge and make better the ideas, right? And it's about creating that space. So it's a power width that I think I hope, I still haven't figured it out fully, but I'm working on to do better. And it does mean that you step back and give room. You become very aware of how you use that power. There's clearly a gendered element to this, right? So we have research that shows that, for example, when you open up a room for questions, and let's say the room is half and half men and women, if the first person to ask the question is male, very likely 2/3 or more of the questions that follow will then come from men. Whereas if the first person to ask the question is a woman, you're more likely to get something more parity. And so I am mindful, for example, in many contexts, that I will, even if I really want to share something, I'll refrain until, say, 2 women have spoken, and then I will keep out. And if I'm facilitating, I will try to do that, right? And so things of that sort. One of the things is we have an app, it's called the Gender Avenger app, that when you are speaking, you can just keep tags of like men, women, non-binary people. You can just keep who's just using, not only who's present, but who's using up the space. And one of the things when we did that in my own team at Co-Impact, we realized that while in our team only 1/4 of our composition is men, when it came to speaking, men, including myself, was speaking way more than 1/4 of the time, right? So it's just being aware of how you make space, how you wield power, and how you make space and actively encourage its space. So, for example, it's, one of the things I've learned from my daughter, I learn a lot from my daughter, is one thing is no judginess, and we'll come to that.
Okay.
But the other is that it's important to kind of create confidence early. So if a session is coming up, 2 days before, I may speak to my colleague, and my goal, the more important thing is not only to get it right. In fact, people got it. 90% of the time they'll get it right, and whatever they don't get right, we will build and figure it out together. It's more around how do you give confidence, particularly to people who have not occupied those spaces, right? So you're aware of the power dynamic, and you just give that signal. It could be a one-sentence WhatsApp message, or it could be a half-an-hour conversation, and that matters. It's trying to spend time in doing that.
You know what I love, and now I'll let you continue in a minute, but what I love about what you're saying is you answered the question I almost had when you talked about, because it's almost as if it's learning how to turn down a strength, or as you said, physically step back so folks can step forward. Now, when I've been in conversations with many leaders, often they struggle with that because they feel that the expectations of their teams are such that when they step back, they're almost like, but why are you not talking? Why are you not coming? Why are you asking us? They're paying you to come up with those ideas. But when I hear from what you're saying, and I think the way I'm hearing you answer that question, to that conundrum, is by building confidence, you are supporting folks to step in as you step back. So you don't just step back and expect miraculously by magic, people will now raise their hands, take up leadership, take initiative, but it's really creating that safe container and encouragement for them to step forward. That's what I hear you saying.
Exactly. Yeah, it's giving them confidence. And I think there still is an OGA role. The OGA role now is not to give the answers, but to frame the discussion. Right? A lot of the time, partly what you do is frame. And framing the discussion may also mean asking people to come up with the right questions. I'm not saying you just frame it in terms of just set the agenda fully, but it is you create the safe container, but you also create the kind of purpose, right? You're kind of reaffirming quietly what are we trying to do here together, and what are the key considerations of values that you think should inform, right? So you can come in as an OGA and say, look, we are here because this is what we need to achieve. And I think here are two considerations that are really important for us to keep front and center. Now, I'm really keen to understand, and I know, she has been working on this, and I'm really curious to hear what she has to say, right? And so that's that sort of thing. So that's one bucket. Maybe I'll just...
Okay. And please remind me to get the link to the Gender Avenger app.
Okay.
So that we can put that in the show notes, because I'm sure everybody's like, oh, we want to use that too. It just sounds brilliant.
It's so simple. It's so simple. And, frankly, I thought of myself as a progressive, self-aware person. And when I start using these apps, none of us are aware as to how much time we take up. But when you're given 3 minutes to speak, you speak for 8 minutes, and then you ask people, how long do you think you spoke for? And they'll say, oh, I went over maybe 3.5 minutes, when you actually went 8. So it's a nice self-awareness tool. And you can also make it very transparent, right? You can say, at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to do this. And right as the meeting ends, we're going to share the results. And it's it's just a simple tool to make us self-aware in a quiet way of signaling, that these values are not just sitting on a nice poster on the wall, but we're going to practice that, right? Yeah.
Fantastic.
The two other things, right? One, and when we alluded to this earlier, is that I feel one other way it changes. I'm much less certain about the things I believe in deeply. Now, I want to be clear here. That doesn't mean I've become wishy-washy, maybe this. I hold views quite strongly, right? I believe things strongly, but for the very things you care about and believe in strongly, I've learned and I'm being much more tentative about that. So I can say, I really think if we do this, we will achieve that. And say it strongly and feel it strongly. And simultaneously, I need to be open with the idea that I may be wrong. Right? And that is crucial. And for the things we don't care about, it doesn't matter. Right? It can be, but for the things we care about, we need to be able to ask the hardest questions and create the most possibility that the things we care about deeply, we may be wrong. Yet in practice, this isn't like if questioning values, but how you put values into practice. So for example, dignity is going to matter always. You never want to say, oh, I want to be wishy-washy about dignity. But then if you have a program or a practice or a policy to achieve dignity, we have to be open to think that the way we frame that policy or the way we've designed that program may not help us do that. That's really crucial.
Wow. This is resonating so deeply with me, because what I hear you saying is almost about being less dogmatic about the things you care most about. But why this is, I have to almost take a moment to take this in, because it's usually the flip side. We're usually about the things we don't care about. We're like, okay, I can change my mind back and forth. But the things that we care deeply about, our values, at least what I'm finding is that today we're becoming a lot more rigid. So I know this for sure. And because I believe in this, there's no tentativeness. There's no willingness to explore and be slightly open about, well, what does this actually mean? What would it mean to live this value? I don't have all the answers. Okay.
And what is really hard here, because it's a fine balance, because a part of a practice that we have often celebrated, especially in communities or constituencies that have been under assault from, neoliberal economics or patriarchal leaders or whatever the case, is that we celebrate the kind of affirmation we do of each other. Yes, absolutely. So when we have meetings, but while that is absolutely crucial, there's a fine line between that and in effect becoming dogmatic and fundamental. Right? So how do we create in a safe space a way of challenging challenging our fundamentalism? Right? Because there is such a thing as progressive fundamentalism as well, right? And
yes.
It's not like the right-wing evangelicals are the only fundamentalists.
No.
And so any fundamentalism, I think we need to challenge. And for me, this links with what my daughter calls no judginess, right? I because it would take too long to explain, but because of the history I've gone through, there are moments in my life, particularly in my early life, where I found myself taking positions or being part of communities that I'm ashamed of now, right? On views, but that was not because I was a bad person or even because I had made bad choices. We have to be careful not to attribute kind of systemic and structural and kind of mainstream views that we all imbibe because we happen to grow up and drink that water and breathe that air. And I think in the empathy we need to bring is that under the circumstances that she has grown up in, I might have find myself in the same place, right? So I think I think in the Bible you have this verse around, he who has not sinned be the first person, cast the first stone. I think it's a view that, I know that I've been super fortunate to have amazing experiences and mentors that have helped me be where I am. But I could have been on the other side. So be very careful not to judge. But the other is also the empathy. Like one of the things I have changed is initially when I started, I could see all the problems in government. And so I painted government as problematic, as bureaucratic, as inefficient, as not smart, in a really fundamentally judgmental and in insulting manner, right? In a kind of arrogance that that you have when you've gone through university and you can see all the problems. And it's only later that when I started to get to know government leaders and see what they were grappling with and the choices they needed to make and the constraints they were facing that I didn't face, that I realized that one, I could learn a lot from them. to their conclusions are often better than my conclusions, the very conclusions that I was condemning. So I think we need to have that. That, again, that doesn't mean anything goes. There's always a moral compass. There's always making judgment as well. But this is where the posture of openness and humility is crucial to be able to navigate things in the world.
So interesting. And, just from this conversation with you and just hearing your journey, without realizing it, Rakesh, you have spelled out very nicely. In fact, you've done a leadership course, the whole module, because you both described the skill sets. Right? And the skill set I heard earlier, particularly if one is working a lot around movements and working with those most affected, skills are the ability to organize and the ability to engage government, those skills. What I just picked up from your journey are the qualities, the attributes, the competencies, the ways of being and showing up, which are the openness. I think your daughter's non-judginess should be a full-fledged competency that's out there, but be not judgy. Going back to your earlier point of maybe it's the openness, but it's also that being able to not be dogmatic or fundamentalist about those things we care deeply about, being empathetic and being humble. So really, you've spelled out very nicely a wonderful framework for the leadership that this continent needs right now.
Taka, thank you. I love the way you summarize and frame. You help me understand my own thinking better when I hear you. May I share one thing I think is super important, which is, and I think you and I have spoken about this when we met at Naivasha, is I think the practice and the clarity we want in the world and in our programs and the work we do needs to be something that starts with ourselves, right? So for me, the lives we live now, and I mean this for leaders, but I also mean this for young people around the continent, our lives are full of noise. Often good noise, like, wonderful things we see on the internet, wonderful messages we get, podcasts we can listen to, meetings we can go to. And when one's life is filled with noise, including many good things, it can kind of make you lose a sense of perspective and what matters the most. And what's the most insidious thing about it is that we can think we are making progress as we tick things off our list. We go from one thing to another, and we lose the soul. We lose what is core and what is the most important. And this is, I think, perhaps the most important quality of leadership. In my view, leaders need to be able to step back and say, yes, it's easy to say, here are 10 bad things we shouldn't do. That's easy. The harder thing that is even more important is to say, there are 20 good things we can do, but in order to be effective, we need to focus on the 2 or 3 that are the most important. And we need to have a practice at an individual level and at an organizational level and at a collective coalition level, because many of us are part of coalitions that allow us to figure that out. So for me, and I've done this on and off, but try to do it more on, it means every day trying to spend half an hour quietly on my own before I touch any phone or screen or, and just to reflect. It means being able to, when you start a meeting and you ask a question, sometimes just saying, let's just take a minute or 2 of quiet to think about it before you answer. It means once a year I take 5-6 days to go on a silent retreat to step back and without the noise. And I think this thing is so important. And I've seen, I've come across some amazing leaders, Taka, who are so effective, but the power of what their leadership gets diluted and fragmented and cluttered because they are running from one conference to another, one meeting to another, one to-do list, email, Slack, WhatsApp. The busyness of things can undermine what is core, can undermine soul.
That, you can just hear me already how much this is resonating. Because indeed, you and I spoke about this when we were last together. And I remember being so amazed about this thing that you do, this silent retreat that you have. But I think what really touched me about that, it was speaking to an urgent need I know I feel often so much within me, but with many of the leaders I work with. And you put your finger on it. It's the noise and the busyness. And that also, the noise prevents us from tuning in to that inner wisdom. And the busyness prevents us from being still enough to really think through what is needed most of me or my organization and the team in this moment. But we have conflated busyness with success. In the work that I do, when I call people and say, oh my gosh, I'm so busy, I can't make it. They're like, you must be doing so well. People actually say, oh, Taka, busy is good. Busy is good, But if I said to somebody, no, I don't, they'd be like, oh my gosh, time is money. So I imagine to do what you're really, and I fully agree with you, is such a priority. To take that time first at the individual level and that collective level means we have to redefine success, rethink what busyness actually means, busy about what, but also particularly to do things like the morning quietness, which I am also a firm believer, and I also do, but I'm not sure I've gotten to the level of your 5-day retreat, is to get comfortable with ourselves. I feel so much of our busyness as leaders is running away from ourselves into acceptable addictions, work addictions, and holisms that never enable us to just sit and face ourselves, look in the mirror, and then ask what is really needed most. So thank you for really lifting that up as one of those key foundations that the best of us could show up in our leadership. Rakesh, you're amazing! Thank you so much. Thank you so much for making time. I could talk to you forever, but I know I should end this conversation. But I'll say this won't be the last time. I'm sure we'll call you back in here again and we'll continue the conversation. So, asante sana ndugu yangu.
Nashukuru Taka, and it's always just a joy to speak with you, and I look forward to many more conversations.
Yes, indeed. Be well. Hello, wonderful leader. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the podcast. I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. If you want more of the lessons, experiences, and nuggets for effective leadership, join our amazing platform for leaders, the African Leaders Circle. Learn more at www.busara-africa.com. And if you liked the show, don't forget to subscribe and share with other amazing leaders. See you soon. Ciao.